Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible enough for everyone. As you may know that for many of us, English came with a ship. So if we mispronounce or misexplain English, please bear with us. But let's focus on the gist of the discussion. So this particular section or this presentation has two sections, and we hope that the time allocated is enough, but has two sections. Then the first section deals with the nature of the research process, and the whole idea is to assist everyone or all of us to appreciate what constitutes research and what you need to do and how you carry out research. Of course, may I also begin from onset that you guys are multidisciplinary in this group. So there are different principles that may be followed, or the formatting, or the skills that you might need. For engineers in the labs, they deal with more lab work, they deal with soils, equipment, materials, and so forth. And then you have the medical group that looks at different areas of research. You know, they take samples and tests and labs and so forth. And then you have the social scientists and also some of the generic guys in the infrastructure that look at what we might call the softer bits, the qualitative nature, or sometimes the quantitative aspect, but more related to questionnaires as a form of data collection and other observations. So there will be different methods, but we just need to understand, why do we take ourselves through all these hurdles just to establish some new knowledge, or to establish a solution to a problem that we might have. And that's why we are looking at what is research. Now, there are some acceptable definitions for research. We've picked a few. The first one is that it's the application of human intelligence in a systematic manner to a problem whose solution is not immediately known. Notice that first, there's the application of your intelligence. And the assumption is you have the ability to identify or recognize what could constitute a problem, and that you would want to solve that problem. And the problem doesn't need to be something you feel, but it could be something that does not seem to exist in your environment. The second aspect in that definition is that this application has to be conducted in a systematic manner. So there's a process that is followed, and that process follows a particular stage or system in order to arrive at a solution. So it's not a haphazard, it's not a magical things of cadabra, whatever you call it, and then boom, something appears. No, this is systematic. It has to be logical. It has to be followed. Somebody has to go through that process, even when you are not there, to understand how you carried out your study. The second one is a collection of methodology and methods. So there's the methodologies, and that's, you know, you have the so-called qualitative, quantitative, and so forth. And then there are methods within the methodology. Within the methods, you have different aspects that you take as well. For instance, you might look at the qualitative aspect and you say, okay, I'll use ethnographic study. I'll use observations. I'll use, those are methods. But the general framework is that they are qualitative. So you choose what would best suit to arrive at a solution to arrive at a solution to your problem that you have identified. And that systematical nature of selecting the methods, as it says here, produces scientifically based knowledge about the reality. So you will be able to justify your arrival at a solution scientifically because you selected methodically the process of carrying out the research. And then, of course, there's a search for knowledge, and of course, the search for new facts in any branch of knowledge. Now, at this stage, you will notice that from the beginning, when we talk about human intelligence, it calls for a critical thinking. And when it talks about facts, again, it calls for critical thinking. So a researcher needs to be critical. And we're not talking about being critical by being in the opposing end, but we are talking about having an extra lens to identifying the process or the problems or the solutions. Ultimately, is for you to come up with the solutions. So the way the mind operates is such that when you hear or see something, you frame it. Okay. Various scholars will tell you that when you hear or see something or you feel there's a problem, you frame it. The way you would take your picture frame, when you get a photo, you take a picture frame, you then frame that photo. The whole idea of framing the photo is not to beautify the picture, but it is so that your mind can focus on this picture. So your idea is you frame it to create boundaries so that the person who looks at your picture can focus on the picture. So the issue is about the focus. Now, when you have focused on the picture, you will notice that you have the positive part and the negative part, just like that picture itself. It will have the back and the front, where there's a picture and the blank part. Or there's always two sides to a coin. And in this case of this frame, you have the positive aspect and you have the negative aspect. And when you focus on that issue, which is either the problem or whatever it is that you have heard, whether you have seen, your mind processes and forms a belief. And you will notice that even when we talk about research, there's about the belief coming out. So the mind focuses and then forms a belief. And that belief in your mind can create the positive outlook, which is the faith, the assured expectation, or it can create doubt. And both faith and doubt are a belief. And it depends on how you handle it. You as a researcher, when you develop the escoit faith, the positive aspect, when your focus is positive, is focusing on the positive nature, it generates an energy to do something. So you become proactive. You begin to search for new things. And that's now where the intelligence, the human intelligence, begins to process and begins to look at a logical way of resolving if it is a problem, or enhancing if there was a solution, improving it, or if you want to look for a new fact. But if you take the negative approach, if your focus is more negative, you only look at things negatively, and then it will generate that element of doubt, which now will cause what many would call procrastination. You begin to delay to do things. You don't have the energy to carry out something, and that's how now you find a person is conducting a study and begins to drift away, and suddenly he just drops off, and you had a student and the student disappears. So that's the framework that one needs to understand on research. Now, within some of the acceptable definitions, we also have the scientific and systematic search for pertinent information. Again, it still deals with how your mind operates. But maybe the focus is when you're dealing with a doctoral study, you will hear from your supervisors always talking about what is the original contribution to the existing stock of knowledge. Okay. So now how do you know that you are going to contribute something, or you will contribute something? It is only through the means of reading. You have to first read and establish that indeed it doesn't exist, or it exists but it is not refined, or it is refined but it needs to be adaptable, or it is adaptable but it may have overlooked certain environmental effects, or the time has lapsed, or the science has changed. So that's the only way you can justify. Otherwise, you can't simply say, no, but I've never seen a bucket being taken to the moon. So it's I know it. You prove to us that you know it by showing us that I read here, they didn't show it. I read in here, they haven't done it. I've checked in this research, I haven't found it. And therefore, we will know that, okay, he has checked through various literature and he has found that there is indeed a gap. However, despite all these numerous definitions for research, the overall purpose of conducting research generally settles with acquisition of knowledge. Okay? And there are key characteristics of research. The first one is that a research gathers new knowledge or data from primary and secondary sources. Okay, I think let's not mix the two. Primary sources is the source that you have, that you will conduct. You will be the one gathering it. That's primary. You know it's primary. But secondary is what others have done. So it is not research when you simply restate or reorganize what is already known, or what has been before published or written about by other researchers. That's not research. However, if you have extensively critiqued the literature, various types of literature, and really identified what each one has been able to lack or contributing over time, and you create this thread, and what others then will call it's a critical literature review, it can be a contribution to the knowledge because you're packaging of several pieces of literature into one piece to understand the phenomena can also be a contribution, because that in itself has made life easier for others. It doesn't necessarily have to be absolutely new. Okay, so that's the first characteristic in research. The second one is that a research involves experts, systematic, and of course, accurate investigation. So you need to give yourself a pat on the back. Just the fact that you have chosen to be a researcher to venture into a postgraduate education or even postdoctoral, you are already thinking, or at least you have that energy, the feeling, you remember the belief that you are beginning to want to be an expert. And so it will push you into learning these systematic and accurate investigations, how they are carried out. So it will push you to read more, to push you to download some YouTube lessons, to push you to download some videos. It will push you into a group of researchers where you critique, you share knowledge, you expose yourself to them so that they can look at your writing skills, your communication skills, your critique skills, your review skills, and that shows that you want to make an improvement. So it's a characteristic that you need to develop. Okay, so you must be able to have expertise in the area chosen of study, as well as data correction means before undertaking investigation. So if if you are an engineer, you deal with the equipment, and now you want to venture into COVID cases, you need to know, do you have relevant knowledge, requisite skills to venture into that study? It may be an exciting study, everybody wants to write about it, but can you contextualize the medical field into an engineering field? And if you feel that you might run short, the level of investigation may not be sufficient, you might wish to find a better way of selecting a different study. Otherwise, you do injustice, okay, to the study. Then research is also highly purposive because it deals with a targeted, significant problem that demands a solution. So you don't shoot everywhere and hope that the bullet will hit the target. It's purposive. You want to solve this problem, and with purpose, you aim for it, and you structure how to get yourself there. And that is why it follows a certain pattern that almost everybody has been teaching you in research methods. Then it also places emphasis on discovery. Okay, it also on discovery of general, on discovery of general principles on which to base generalization. Okay. Then it maintains rigorous standards. So there's always rigor. Somebody will always say the rigor is missing. How much have you dug? How much have you gone deep? How much reading have you done? How much thinking have you applied yourself? You know, it's if you know I don't know. You've been to your supervisor, and you sit, and he asks you the first question. You think you have answered it, and then he tells you you didn't understand the question. You said you are looking at practices. Why are you looking at effects? And then you relook at your title and you say, yeah, it's true, man. My title reads practices. But why am I focusing on effects? You feel stupid, but really it's part of learning. Now, it depends on what you focus on. If you focus on he's exposed my imaginative skills, I'm now incapable, then you get into that belief of being negative. But if you look at, he has given me a light, there's a bulb in my mind that now has lit. You are now focusing on the positive affect, it will give us to move on. So it requires that a researcher be not just a scholarly, but also an imaginative person possessing the highest ethics, values, and integrity to protect the profession. You need to think through, you need to imagine these new things, you know, what you might consider as sci-fi, and then later they become real. Yeah. So that's what we expect from you. Then, of course, the research generally involves a hypothesis or a tentative explanation of a phenomenon or a solution to a problem. We'll discuss this a little bit later. And then research is carefully recorded and reported. Okay, it carefully recorded and reported. I'll come back to this, but just to give you this whole process we have described, it's sitting somewhere very far. This is the process we have just spoken about, where you, when you have focused your mind here, at the end of the day, you need to report. You need to inform others. You need to report your research. This is what I have done. And the dissemination process is either through a journal, through a conference proceedings, a symposium, books, book chapters. There are different platforms that you can do that. Blogs now, all these different platforms that people use to inform others. But in research, there's always an aspect of has your work been reviewed by others? Because the same work you have done, if you claim you have established a new thing, then what you want is your peers in that field must go through your work to determine that indeed you have added to what they had already established. And that's why there's an emphasis of, has the work been peer reviewed? It is not simply to get someone to read your English and correct it and format the paper. No, it's about the content and the quality of the research, whether it really adds to what others have already done for it to be considered new or of high value. Okay. So research has to be recorded and reported. Now, why do we conduct research? Firstly, to produce or accumulate a body of verifiable knowledge that enables explanation and also prediction and generalization of phenomena. And here we are not talking about the political language. If we do have politicians here, we are academics, sorry. We will have to tell you that normally when they open their mouth, they say nothing. And sometimes even the nothing they say was written for them by what you might think could have been professionals. So they go and read something. So they will issue statements. We are doing everything we can to ensure that our people are looked after. The whole statement means nothing. It's unverifiable information. What is the everything you can? Who is our people? And when you said to ensure, how? You see, those are questions that a researcher remains behind asking questions and is beginning to think, okay, why am I wasting my time listening to this? So you want to produce a cumulative body of knowledge that can be verified. This is what we are doing, not we are doing everything we can, but this is what we are doing. This is how it was done, and this is what it produced. to ensure this is how we ensured, this is the outcome and the impact or the effect. So we know it ensured. And the everything is this and this and this and this. So it's not just everything we can. So we know we can now use this knowledge to predict and generalize what you are explaining. The second is to enable exploration of the phenomena. So the purpose of conducting research allows you to explore, and therefore it begins with the familiar information. What do we know? What don't we know? Based on what we know. This is the information that we have. And from what we have read, clearly there are these gaps, which shows that we don't know. And therefore, this is the gap or the limitation that this study seems to be identifying that would need to be closed. And that exploration process is the purpose of conducting a research. The third one is that it enables description of situations. Yeah, that's self-explanatory. And then, of course, an explanation of causes, linkages, and relationships in a situation or event that is being observed. Okay, so you are not just identifying the cause, but you are providing information on the cause. So you explain the cause and the links. And then, of course, you contribute to the knowledge, which, as we said, ultimately it deals with knowledge. The main objective of conducting research is obviously to explain relationships among variables, with obviously the cause and the effects, and also to gain familiarity of the subject matter and to portray accurately an occurrence or phenomena, to determine frequency of occurrence. Okay, so some of you might be having an objective that reads to determine the extent. Yeah, and you have a research that reads, a question that reads, to what extent does? Okay, so what you are trying to test really is about either the frequency or the levels where it sits. So you need to determine that the moment you deal with these things, you are almost invariably looking at numbers because they are measurable. And then, of course, you want to test hypotheses. Now, you need to note that in engineering, a hypothesis is normally implied already. But in social science, because you deal with the variables, independent variables and dependent variables, and how they push or pull, correlates, you will have a lot of those things. You want to test the hypothesis. In engineering, you go into the lab and you find the answer. I mean, it's so those are things that you just need to know how to differentiate the two. Why do we conduct research? The necessity of research is to explain relations, to satisfy demand for new information, to provide credibility in the explanation of understanding, and of course to anticipate problems. Proactivity is important. I'm going to skip this because we need to go to the meat part. The significance of conducting research is that one, it is a source of knowledge. I don't know how many of you were at my age when we used to have a movie called Knight Rider. Michael Knight. You may not have been born for some, but for others, you might remember that this vehicle used to speak. It could move without a person, a driver. It could react and be commanded, advised, and it could also sense that the owner is in trouble. Now, what is interesting about this movie is that it was called sci-fi. Okay, it was sci-fi. It was fake. It was science fiction. That's what sci-fi is. It was science fiction. But today, we have Uber. We have vehicles that take you to a destination without a driver. You have vehicles that respond to you. You tell them to switch off, to switch on. We communicate, and you can therefore instruct it to go. So what was sci-fi is now sci-fac. So it's science fact. It's no longer science fiction. So you see, what has changed is that over time, somebody was imagining, if you go back to where we were, somebody was imagining what is it possible to have something like this? And because he could not have sufficient evidence to produce that thing, he could only create a story around it. But then others now sat back and says, hang on, can we establish more information on this? And conducted a systematic study, which now eventually culminated into the reality. So what may seem as sci-fi today, Star Trek, moving of ships, robots, and so forth, could be the imagination of those that may not really take that into reality. Now, you as scientists can now begin to say, but can we actualize this? You see, that's the purpose of research. It becomes the source of knowledge, the source for discoveries, inventions, innovations. Now you begin to design prototypes, products, processes, and you establish something that becomes real. So it becomes a basis for formulating policies and strategies by governments, organizations, companies, World Bank, IMF, World Health Organization, International Labour Organization. These multilateral institutions conduct massive research, and they are a large data bank of research. In fact, for your record, the World Bank, what it has the most is not the bank for money. It's the bank, it's a repository of knowledge. And that tells you that they conduct a lot of research. So when you complete your doctoral studies, it's not about ending up being an academic. It's about your ability to inform, your ability to formulate, your ability to discover. You become the source of knowledge. And so you can now work with the World Bank. You can be creative. You can actualize your own established knowledge and then incubate and commercialize it. It's a way you approach the research. That's the significance of conducting research. Apart from all these, it is also a solution to many society problems, including social, economic, political, developmental, mankind, survivability, etc. Just this week, if you are following the world, on Monday or Tuesday, the president of the US, Joe Biden, signed, I'm not sure whether it's a $2 or $4 billion research fund. And he says that fund will be channeled to any company that is going to establish a research to discover new things and to make America take its place as a lead in science, technology, and innovation. That's a lot of money. $2 billion, or is it $4 billion? I can't remember the figures, but he's just signed that for this year. You see? Because from his political vantage, he can see that he needs a solution to run the country. It does not need to be him, but he's doing it for the nation. But here in Africa, you'll find that's when we take the money away from research and we invest it into political organizations or other institutions that will make us regain our position back into power. So we need to look at the significance of conducting research. It is also necessary for academic and professional advancements. I think that's the only thing that everybody knows. They don't see it as a source of livelihood or vacation, as a means to distribute knowledge and new ideas, enhances creativity and innovation, establishing or enabling the making of generalization as new theories arise, including over and above all the other reasons research is being a fountain of knowledge. Key issues in the research choice. First, you need to ask yourself a question: why should I conduct research in my chosen area or specialization? Okay. Now, if you are conducting a PhD, not a DEng, a D-Eng or a D-Tech, a Doctor of Technology, you may not have philosophical concepts in it. A Doctor of Engineering, you may not have philosophical concepts in it. But if you are conducting a Doctor of Literature, a Doctor of Philosophy, you will need to understand, like it says, consider and answer the ontological and epistemological issues. You need to understand the philosophical concepts. Okay, you need to know that anything below your skin is internal. So attitudes, emotions, culture, feelings cannot be measured quantitatively. You can't say I had 5 feelings of love. No, you can't. It's the way you feel is different from the way somebody else would feel. So you need to choose which philosophy best fits this area that I have chosen of study. Am I measuring things that can only be that are below the skin of a human, or am I measuring, testing, researching on something that is above the skin? Okay, so if it's above the skin, it's outside the body. Okay, again, there could be certain things that are outside the body that can still be measured qualitatively, but in the main, they are measured through experiments, quantitatively. They can be measured. You know, you can tell that there are 5 things standing here. They are outside your body, but you cannot measure 5 things inside your body, the feelings, the culture, the attitude. So those philosophical concepts are key issues that you need to consider in conducting your research to your chosen area. Another question you would want to ask yourself is, how is the chosen research process to be designed? And this is now what we call the methods and the methodology. Okay, so research design is critical in the conducting of a research, because in any case, the word conduct is about the processes that you follow, how you behave towards something in order to get a solution. So you have to design the methodology. You have to design the methods. You even have to design how the data you have collected will be analyzed and how it shall be presented. You have to select the instruments or the tools that will be used to help you collect the data. Okay, including the instruments and tools that will be used to analyze. So within the analysis, you choose the methods of analysis. I'll use regression analysis, or I'll use thematic methods, or so forth. But then, what would be the tools I'll use to conduct this regression? You say maybe I'll use the famous SPSS or whatever other tools. They're different, but again, you must explain why this tool. Has it got limitation? Are there other tools that can do better job, even if I'm using these methods to analyze? So that has to be conducted. There are questions you must answer when having research choice. Has my or similar research been conducted before? Where and for what? Obviously, this now calls for you to read widely. The easier way to go is you simply go into Google Scholar. Google Scholar is much wider. It might pick some of the irrelevant information because it scans quite a lot. But there are also other repositories where most scientific articles are indexed. You have the Scopus, you have the semantics, you have the Pablons, and then you have your ResearchGates. You have different platforms. Yeah, but the bottom line is you need to be deliberate and really determine, after you've scanned through all these platforms, that has this work been conducted elsewhere? If it has, how much has been covered? How far did they stop? What was discovered in there? Is it similar, closer, or further from what I want to do? If that's so, can I then go ahead with this study? Or do I need to tweak the direction I need to take? Okay. And then, of course, you need to ask yourself a question: is conducting my chosen study worthy the costs in terms of investment time, finance, effort, sponsorship, family choice? Okay, these are some of the things. Now, I always tell my students, they will be telling me that, yeah, but I need to solve this problem. And I'm telling him, Bwana, this will take you 10 years. Because you need to solve this problem first to get to this stage for you to get to where you want to be. If you insist, then I'll ask my student, what do you want? Do you want to solve the world's problem, or do you want a degree? Then he will say, I want to solve the problem and get a degree. Then we will agree now. For the degree, this is enough. You would have contributed sufficient information. Don't eat an elephant alone. Once you have now known how to conduct research, you now know how you can move to the next level. you then now can come back and do a postdoc and now continue with this research of solving a problem. And even then, you probably can only go up to so much, and you may still not be able to solve the problem the way you had started it off, because you are eating a monster. You want to eat a piece at a time, and each piece you have eaten is enough to get you out into the world with a knowledge of research. So when you select a topic, you need to first of all determine, is it worth the cost? Is it worth the time? Is the effort worth it? Is the sacrifice worth it? Can I reduce this into something I can consume? And let the institution or my supervisor determine whether what I have reduced to is sufficient for me to go away with a qualification. And then we can now begin to solve the problem. Other key issues is, who are the end users of your findings? Is it university, government, company, NGO, or is it multilateral organizations that want to keep information about a particular continent or area? How will my research findings be disseminated to satisfy all stakeholders? Which platform? Do you want to be read, which means you publish in books, journals, and so forth? Or do you want to be heard? That means you attend and present through conferences, or you present through workshops and symposia. So there are people who love networking and they want to speak to people about their findings, so they go to the conferences. But they also make sure that those conferences, the proceedings of what they have presented, could then be converted into either a journal at a later stage or a book chapter, or it fits into the proceedings. But either way, they would have known that at least I'm guaranteed there was an audience that knows what I am doing. Whereas in the journal, you are not guaranteed. You can publish an article. You will be fortunate if others will read. Even more, if at all they will even cite and refer to your work. But at a conference, someone will ask a question, beginning to process his mind, relating it to what he is doing or what he has seen others doing. So when your supervisors advise you to say, please endeavor to attend at least 2-3 conferences. Yes, we need journals for you to graduate, but it's important you attend. It's because they want to see, one, have you developed the art of communicating to the audience, presenting your material so logically, and clarity is important. So we talk about brevity, simplicity, and clearly to the audience, that they will go home and keep remembering what your study was all about. And at the same time, your work is visible. Then you also network. That's what they're trying to do to you. It's not, they're not bothering you. No, I'm still reading, sir. I'm still doing research. No. That's not the intention. The intention is you also need to know what is happening out there, and also learn other skills in the presentation. And then obviously there are other key considerations to your choice. The relevancy and the validity of your study. Is it history, or is it futuristic? Is it something we need now, or we are just conducting a study because we need a degree? So you need to look at that too. And then, is your research envelope sufficient to enable conduct of the research? In the envelope, we are talking about your purse, your availability, the materials that you need. Otherwise, we do have, for instance, here, where our students would want to to conduct a very good study, but the student is limited with the equipment. There's just no lab equipment to deal with that. He's stuck. So you need to consider that too. Do we have facilities? And the other thing you want to check is, I know that most websites of academia may not really say much about individuals, but if you check the websites in Europe, in America, in the developed world, there's something very peculiar about their websites. They project an individual and his skills, his capabilities, how much he is able to perform as supervisors on that, because that's what they are marketing. They are marketing the expertise they have. So when people are logging in, searching for an expert in a particular area, they can find the person. You know what? This is an expert I need. And since I want to go to this university, this is the person I want to be my supervisor. So expertise, when we talk about material, it's not just lab material, equipment, facilities, but we're also looking at expertise. The individual supervising has, there are many of us with doctoral qualifications, but not many of us know how to supervise. We don't have people's skills. Okay, so we all struggle in one way or another, all of us. So because we are dealing with people, we're not dealing with machines. We are dealing with people, and people have different feelings. They may wake up having fought with their husbands or their wives, and then they bring it to the supervisor, and then you snap. But you didn't fight. You are then in the relationship suffers. Are considered when we are not talking to resources. We are also talking about other softer skills in conducting of research. Of course, there are types of research. There's basic research, strategic research, and applied research. And we in this engineering, we are in the applied area. So we don't deal with the chemistry, those are basic research, okay? The pure sciences, as others would call it. As we are in the applied, so we want to take whatever knowledge we have established and make things, okay? We apply the science and come up with things. The mobile phones we have, your building materials you have, your steel, your vehicles, or everything else that we are using right now, the tables, the chairs, the electricity, that's applied science. And also within the agriculture, they also do applied science. There's the science in the agriculture, and then there's the application itself, and then there's also the business aspect, the agriculture economics aspect. So there's all these sections of types of research that we need to choose. So, but we need to find a space or a niche where our study fits in. Okay. In terms of research design, as we know it, it involves the processes through which your scientific research processes goes through. I think we've explained a little bit about it, that it will follow a particular process. And so that process may vary from one research or the person conducting it to another. It might look like you're doing similar things. I'll give you an example. We are trying to make a rock, an engineered rock, for a particular area where there's no rock. But that particular area has different types of soil. And now we, the doctoral candidate decides he will look at microbial means of generating a rock. So that means we need, first of all, grow the microbes and then create the glue, and then whatever, come up with a rock. But then in the process of explanation, he says, then I also need to check the chemical components. Now that's a chemical process, it's a different one, okay? So we then decide, no, hang on. What you have just said is we need 3 doctoral candidates, okay? You have come up with an idea, but we need 3 doctoral candidates. One who will look at microbial, one who will look at the chemical components, and one who will look at the elements within the soils. So that's 3 different studies, but all of them leading towards formation of rocks. There will be an engineered rock, which is also coming from microbes, and there will be an engineered rock, which is coming from the chemical components. So he ends there. But then in the defense, somebody tells him, no, hang on. You need to test whether that rock will stand a test of time. Now, do you see that now this study is beginning to be a longitudinal study? It's now a longitudinal study, which means it almost has an unknown end time in it. You can't put time to it because for you to test the rock, you have to pass it through all elements, natural elements, nature, okay, and then also pass it through the simulated elements in the labs. But then what happens if there's a reaction? So it's essentially what people are saying is that there are different processes of research or types of research in this one study. And you can have several individuals conducting a study. This one ends here, gets out, exits, another one takes it up, exits, another one takes up, exits, another one takes up, exits, until eventually we have tested it to either a bridge or a water structure or an exposed structure like a building or a road, which allows other chemical components like bitumen and cement and other limes to come in, and we don't know whether it will kill the whatever it is that was used. So those are things, when you are conducting a research, you need to keep on going and going in your mind so that when you are structuring and designing your research process, it is more clear that I think I'll end here. This output is sufficient. Okay, so the process itself may vary depending on an individual, but it must be scientific and should be able to be followed by anybody else. So here are what research design does, okay? The factors that you can consider. That's the choice of research topic, the purpose for undertaking research work, your skills. I think we've explained that. As a researcher, you need to know yourself. Sometimes we think we are too intelligent until we are exposed. Then we get into a discouraged mode. But sometimes we think we are too useless until somebody encourages us and we realize we can actually do it. So your skills, you need to know yourself. You need to do an innocent introspection and evaluation of yourself as a researcher. Then your understanding of your literature concerning your formulated statement of your study, of your problem, the end users of your research findings, available resources and time to enable your data collection, analysis, and of course the publication. Of course, there are issues that we have in the research process. But then let's look at the key steps in the research process. First, interest or idea leading to the choice of your topic is the first step. Then you can now identify a theory that supports or at least helps you to understand the interest or the idea that you have selected. Then you can now develop a concept of the problem that led you to that topic or the idea. Then, of course, you can isolate the problem after brief literature review. Then operationalize the research process as dictated by the chosen methodology, and then identify the involved variables for measurement purposes. Which ones are independent and how do they relate to the dependent variable? A dependent variable is always the outcome, okay, that you intend to achieve in your study. And then the independent variables are usually the factors or effects that influence the output that you're looking at. Then, of course, there's employing appropriate research techniques, identifying appropriate data sources. I know people that have taken a year to collect data because from the beginning, they did not think through that their source would be difficult. For instance, you want to study about how the military works. You see, that's I don't know how you will be able to study that, because first of all, you need to be vetted, to be cleared. Then there's a committee of generals that sits and looks at why you are conducting this, why on them, or how would they allow a civilian to come into their knowledge and understand some confidential matter, defense issues. In the meantime, you are at a data collection stage and they are still sitting, trying to find a way of collecting that data. 1 year gone. So you need to also look at data source, okay? Choosing appropriate data gathering instruments, collection of credible data, and that's why you need to also check the test. I mean, Chromebook is a good tool to check the internal consistency of what you have collected. How credible is your data, of course. Processing and analyzing the data, and of course, deriving conclusion and generalization. And then, of course, the ultimate goal, which is solving the problem now and making sure that somebody follows through. Okay, so I'll stop here. I think the first half, we have covered sufficient material so that we can ask questions, and then we will go to the second part, which is research proposal writing. So now we're going to look at research proposal. We have looked at what you need to consider when conducting a research, and whether you are a research material as an individual, and how you look for people to support you to conduct research, your supervisor, your materials, and so forth, the institution. And then, of course, we need to look at now you have now made the choice. You have decided you are going ahead. What do you need to do and how do you do it? And that's what we are looking at. We are looking at considerations. The writing part, you will do the writing, but here we will just look at what to consider. So there's a question, when does conducting or the writing a thesis start? And we are looking at writing, not conducting a research, but writing. Because remember when we started on the first part of our lessons that the ultimate, the last process of your research is about dissemination. Where are you disseminating this information? And how will this information be used? So dissemination will end with writing a thesis or writing a dissertation, or writing an article, or writing a paper proceeding, or a book chapter. Whatever it is, it will be writing. But in our case, we are looking at academic writing, which is more postgraduate. So when does it start? For us, we need to understand that writing a thesis starts on the day you start your research project. Okay? The day you start your research project. Now, remember where this day is. This day is the process itself commences in your mind. When you begin to think through, because of something you probably have seen, have felt, have heard, or a question that has raised an interrogative mind. So you will have that's the day you start, because those thoughts need to be reduced to a piece of paper, or in our case, electronic version. So you may type it that, you keep it, and you begin to think through. Maybe it stimulates your mind to say, let me search about this. Let me understand how this works. So that's the day you start. Because what you start writing, how you start structuring your title, how you start structuring your thoughts, is actually the beginning, and usually where you started is where you end. So we always advise people, do not throw away your first thought. Your first thought becomes a nucleus on which other ideas begin to build. You might twinkle it here and there, but ultimately it's a trigger. Okay, so that's when it starts. And then it will run through that process that we spoke about, that it has to be systematic and it has to be logical. It's a process, and therefore it will run through stages. So you will generate your topic, then you will begin thinking through it, and then designing how you will carry out it. And that in itself is the whole process called designing the research project. And then you will then conduct the research work itself. So when you have designed, this is now for academic purposes, you will have your proposal, which you then disintegrate into chapters, because in your proposal, you will have everything. You will have a bit of literature review, you will have a bit of methodology, you will have a bit of ethical review considerations, you will have a bit of your chapter 1, even potential contribution to the body of knowledge. You will have it in your proposal. So that design, when you are done with it, you will now conduct, you will now carry out the study. Now you will say, okay, is this literature sufficient? What else exists that I may have omitted at the beginning? Then you dive into the literature review. Is this method I gave, is the framework okay, or can I expand it? Can I reduce it? Or is the source of data now the hindrance, or the way the data has to be collected needs to be relooked at and therefore must change, because I will not be able to be with them so that I am seeing what is happening, but I can send information which they can fill in, or I need to collect certain things and use them in my lab and work through them under controlled environment. So you are now conducting. So you conduct, and in some cases, as you conduct the study, you will pick up certain elements you may not have captured in your methodology. So while the methodology may be so detailed, the process of conducting the study itself. The process of conducting the study itself can also inform you you say that propose how to get or the you say what you do. So you might have omitted maybe a stage or a process within the process or a system within the system. And now you can go back and improve on it. And that is why we have that section called a write-up section. Okay, it's you are now writing what you have done. So that's a stage it will go through. So there's always a question we ask our students sometimes to say, what is the last chapter you write in your study? And they all say conclusion and recommendation. And then we tell them, no. It's actually chapter 1. It's the last chapter you write. Because the majority of chapter 1 is in the proposal. So it is more futuristic. You tend to talk about what you will do, and you may even think that you provided sufficient background information, but in the process of your literature review, you discover some better justification of your study, which you can now put back in your background of your chapter 1. So now that we know what to do, the detail of what is happening here and here is what is happening here. You would have selected your title, you get it approved, and I think you have something decent, and then you provide research questions. Now, when we say research questions, we're not talking about a question with a question mark. When we speak about research question, the research aim, the research objectives, the research questions themselves, the hypothesis, all those fall within the category of research question because they stimulate thinking and assist with the designing on how the process should be conducted. So there are studies that just deal with the hypothesis. There are studies that have everything in it, objectives, aim, questions, and hypothesis. And there are studies that will just have objectives only. That depends on the style of the institution or the way the supervisor prefers his material to be managed. So that's a cycle you'll have to follow. And again, like we said, at the end of the day, you will need to inform others. Okay, so it is here where your art of writing becomes crucial. So in the designing of a research project, you always want to find out what are the research questions? What are the action words that are appearing in my objectives or my research question? They are action words, and these action words move you to act, which means they will stimulate the process of conducting a study. And so you will decide how and what type of data will be needed and collected. But that has to come from the question. So if you say you want to determine, see the word determine means you want to know. The word determine is an action word. It moves you to do certain things. And then what follows will be decided on, is this determination going to be conducted qualitatively or quantitatively? Okay. If you say you want to analyze, the word analyze in itself also is an action word. So that the question informs the type of data and how it will be collected, and of course, how it will be analyzed and interpreted. So the key really lies in how you structure this research question. But then what is a research proposal? Writing a proposal and its subsequent mission to your university or any relevant authority is obviously the first step in the conducting of any scientific research. And the proposal is defined as a document, okay? Which means it has to be written. A document authored by the researcher or whoever it is that is proposing it to describe and summarize some of the details that he will follow in conducting that research. So that's what the research proposal is. It is a document. And because it is document, it has to follow a particular outline. Obviously, what I've given here are basics. And they're basics in the sense that we expect to see these in any proposal. But there are others that may not be here that your school or your units has adopted as a standard. Okay, now scientific writing, the first stage of scientific writing is that you need to understand the format of where your work will be disseminated. So in this case, because it's for academic purposes, you need to understand that the format of the institution matters. And so even when they send it out for examination, when your work is done, usually they'll also send their format and say, this is the structure of our institution. These are the type of references we expect, so that the examiner does not start marking your work using another institution where he is based as a standard. Yeah, so you see, for instance, you know, in America, Americans judge the world based on their laws and their culture of doing things. Okay. And this is because they have not bothered to understand what is happening in other lands. Okay, so they don't come down to your land and look at what are your laws and what informed these laws and whether the laws are within the acceptable norms of the society that the laws are working in. So in their mind, if your norms are at variant with their laws, then you are breaching the world's problem, because they always measure your performance against their laws. So when they say you are infringing against human rights, they mean the rights that they have in their laws, not your laws. So this is what we try to avoid in academics. We don't want to use our laws where I am, the laws where the other examiner is, to punish the student. So, but the standard is that we expect to see a research topic. This is universal. We expect a bit of some literature review. That's universal. We expect to see that in your literature review, you have identified the gaps or limitation of the previous studies. We expect to see that. So your synthesis and your critique must be very clear. And you must be able to show that you understand that this is this person's information, or these authors failed to project this gap, how they closed it. So it remains a gap. They only dealt with this aspect and this aspect, but this component is still missing. You show that. You have shown that, and that the gaps you have isolated amount to your theme that you want to resolve. So we don't expect to see 100 gaps shooting everywhere in different directions. We expect that as you read, you will pick the gaps and the literature that is around your body of knowledge. So when you select a topic, you need to fit that topic into the body of knowledge. If I use the, say, project management, it has now 13 knowledge areas. And one of the 13 knowledge area is risk management. Okay. Then in that risk management, you now need to, again, further identify your topic. Where does my topic fit in this risk management? Am I looking at the statistical way of quantifying a harm or a risk? You see, so we expect that you pick the body of knowledge, project management, then you narrow down to your risk management, then you further narrow down what constitutes risks. Are we looking at these types and these types and these types? And then you go down to the final aspect where your study now fits in. But in the process leading to your study area, you would have shown that there's a gap here, there's a gap here, and there's a gap here that has finally informed why I need to conduct this study. So we can't expect you now to, if your area is a subset of a risk management, you to start talking about scope management and quality aspects or human resource integration. You see, you are shooting everywhere. You are now eating an elephant alone. We need you to move from an elephant to a tail to the last aspect of the tail. Then we know we have arrived. We will only be addressing the last aspect of the tail, or from the elephant into the ear of the elephant, and then we are just chopping a little bit of that ear. Then the rest will come and eat the rest of the ear. So that's the way you narrow it. We don't expect you to simply talk about the elephant, then there's a lion, then there's a cow here, because we are dealing with animals. No. So that's how you deal with. We expect to see that when you are narrowing down this gap, leading to the problem that addresses your topic, you would have shown us that you have limited your work to the study area. These are standard things we expect to see. Then we also expect to see that the problem statement or the research problem has been clearly identified. But in the process of your identifying gaps and limitations, you still fail to show the problem relative to your topic, then you don't have a study. So a research proposal is a complete plan of action on your study. Okay, it's complete yet brief. So it has to be concise but complete. What is the purpose of a proposal? Firstly, you want to convince the recipient. Who are the recipient of a proposal? If I'm writing a proposal for academic, then I have usually 3 or 4 recipients. The first one is I must convince my supervisor, potential supervisor, if I haven't selected him yet. I must convince the department committee that reviews those topics and then shares within the Departmental Research and Innovation Committee that will then look at it and say, I think the best candidate to supervise this work is this one. Okay, yes, the candidate may have selected this one, but maybe we need to support this person with this one so that we now have co-supervisors to strengthen the supervisory panel. So that's the second set of your recipient of your proposal. Then you have the school committee or board that has to also look at the topic and then look at the selected supervisors, whether they are competent and they are adequate. They will also guide that, look, this guy has not graduated a PhD. He's only starting, so he can't be the main supervisor. Maybe if he's a main supervisor, shall we give him an experienced person below him to provide support? Or can we get another person from another institution to collaborate in the supervisory of this area? Because this person may be a skilled person in the subject matter, but he doesn't have an experience in the research process. You know, such things happen, and the board can guide. So that's another recipient in your academic cycle. Don't forget that after your proposal, and if it is scientific enough from the basic sciences or the natural sciences, usually you might be required to submit an ethical approval for your study. So your research ethics committee in the institution or board, institutional review board, in your institution or wherever that would be where you take it for review, is also another recipient, and they will be looking at certain things that may not necessarily be looked at by your committee that approved your study. Okay, because their interests are in the risks arising from your study, ethical risks, interference with people, data management, and so forth and so on. And then, of course, if your proposal has to do with funds for research, or even if you're a student, but maybe somebody needs funds from NRIF or so, they will need to submit some of your research briefs. And so NRIF might be a recipient, okay? So that they know that they are funding this particular research. Then if there are other funders, international funders, maybe it's the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and other multilateral bodies, the Institutes of Health, and so forth and so on. There are also different funders. So these recipients need to be convinced that it's worthy giving you the money, it's worthy investing my time to look at your work. And this institution is not just adding a list of PhD candidates or master's candidates who are passengers just to add the numbers, but they sit in the system for years without getting out. Okay, so you need to convince them that no, you are not a passenger, you are a player, and you will soon exit. Another purpose of research proposal is that the selected research topic, the knowledge gap, problem, and scientific approaches that you hope to adopt in your study are sound and worthy supporting. So you need to capture those things clearly, succinctly, yet convincing, so that whoever it is that is investing his time or any resource in there is convinced. Then also, we expect to see a research proposal must in all possible form and manner possess the qualities of courting, seduction, persuasion, and apparent appeal, so as to be able to convince the intended recipients as to its purpose. So, as others would say, it must be sexy. Okay, it needs to be attractive to this study, to this area. So when people say these are our research areas and our research centers within our department, and it doesn't really attract them, although it fits within the study area, but it's not attractive, they will find all sorts of reasons why you should go somewhere else. They agree with you, but it doesn't attract them. So really, a research proposal is an important tool to your study. And of course, you have to respond to a call, okay? And sometimes the call might stipulate for academic purposes, then you know it's for academic purposes. If it's for funding, they will even tell you, we need a brief of this much, a summary or an abstract. We need to see the following in it. It should have so many characters or words. So it's a boundary they are creating. And so the purpose of the core is to ensure that the area they have, the boundaries they have created are met. Okay, that's the topics, the boundaries themselves, the format that they've given you, the length, the number of characters, the types and styles of technical issues that are required. They even stipulate the font, the spacing between sentences, spacing between paragraphs, if there's something like that, or characters, and they will tell you everything. Don't assume that they are being petty, as we hear from many. This guy, I sent him a document, he just collected the English and the sentences and formatted in my work and sent it back. Me, I'm looking for substance. So what is substance to you? You see, you are not responding to the institutional requirements. That's scientific writing. When we say technical care, we are looking for your obedience to our tools and our formats and our standards. So if we say this font must be 14 and you decide to give everything in 12, we'll send it back. You might have the best of the information in there. People will send it back, because if you are failing to pay attention to the smallest of the detail like that, how can we respect you that you are able to conduct a detailed study? You see, when a first detail, you are failing to conduct it. Okay, so very important that you, when you are responding to calls, whether it's for academic or for the purposes of funding, follow the boundaries and stick to them. If they say it should not exceed 10 pages, don't give them 11 and say, no, but these are just references. Read the instructions again. Is the 10 inclusive or exclusive? If it is inclusive, then go and adjust and submit the 10. Then, of course, you must always include a proposal, like any other proposal in the business circles, should always stipulate how much it will cost you to complete this work and how long it will cost you, how long it will take you to complete the work. So the budget and the time has to be very specific and precise. Because when they are offering you, they are awarding you that they are awarded on the basis of your submission. You told us you will complete within 3 or 4 years. So we have given you your 4 years. And you told us you will complete at this cost for that 4 years. And we have given you the amount. So you can't come back to me to say, sorry, I had forgotten that I will need to drive. So I forgot fuel. They don't care. You submitted and we approved on the basis of your submission. So specify items, try and brainstorm what you need to really complete your study. It's very, very important. Otherwise, you may fall short, because even though you may be funding it on your own, your supervisor on the other side might be looking for money to assist you, but he needs something to use to assist you. And that something is the proposal. So that when you come back and say, sorry, sir, I had forgotten that I'll need ink to print. He has covered it. He has bought ink for you and he has bought printer, and you can go to his office and print, or in the center to print, because he knows that these costs will be needed at some stage. The aim for writing a research proposal is, one, to convince the academic or research board that you have identified a topic that, through conduct of preliminary literature review, you have identified a knowledge gap, an appropriate research problem, worthy investigating, and related research objectives and questions. Notice the conviction is to the academic boards or committees within the structures of the institution, and that you have conducted some sufficient reading, and that you can demonstrate that what you have read is currency, and then from this current literature, there are still gaps that you can close. Then it's also to give intentions on the research problem and surrounding issues that you are to research upon, and of course to nurture a researchable problem in the light of available literature. You also want to ensure the research board or supervisor that you have done sufficient reading regarding literature. Now remember, although the references you include might be 10 or 20, because that's what you have cited in text, but from your bibliography, you could have read much more. To arrive at 10, you probably have read 200. And by the time you get to 50, you'll be learning and teaching yourself even much more new knowledge. So if you are the type that just dismisses based on the title, no, it's not the one. No, it's not the one. You might actually lose out on some information in the detail that you could use to support your information. And that is the only way you can now convince your supervisor and the research board that you read extensively and you were able to dismiss other information on the basis that they were not within your body of knowledge. Then it's also there to help the researcher in organizing your own time and ideas and so forth. Remember, we mentioned that your research starts from the mind. From the moment there's something that clicks in your head, maybe because you've heard something, you've listened to something, okay? So from that moment, you begin to put ideas together, mind maps. You're looking at those different ideas, and you begin to process data. You read this, you read the reports from government, you read parliamentary reports, you read auditors' reports, you read. There are so many issues surrounding, and then you begin to pick all these ideas. And then by the time you get into the literature itself, your thoughts, your thought patterns would have been clear. You can see clearly that this is the idea I want to take, and this is the direction I'm pursuing. So your line of thinking and ideas relating to your topic can be very clear in the proposal. Just reading the very first page is enough for an experienced reader to assess that there's something in here or something not worth reading. So it all begins with the title. The title has to be brief. Okay, you need to provide the title of the research. You may also provide personal information, your name, your details, your addresses, your areas of specialization or study. You can even indicate the date that you submitted the proposal. Then you can provide background information. In the background information, it's a short summary around issues and the problem that you want to study. Remember, you are coming from the global perspective. Like we said, you're looking at the project management as a whole. I'm just using it as an example. And then these are the body areas, but all these do not really relate to this. The one that relates to this is the risk. So from the risk is divided into different types. And then you pick that one type which addresses your title. And then from that type, then you break it down further, and then you say, this is the item I want to address. So that's what the most researchers call the funnel. You start globally, and then you go down to the specific. So when they say start globally, they don't mean that you start with the UN, then you go to AU, then you go to SADC, and then you come to your political party. No, they mean in that body of knowledge, have you understood what is happening across the subject matter? Has it been covered adequately? Have you narrowed it down until you have reached the stage where you understand? I've seen people have fallen into a trap of showing in America, this is what they've done, in the UK, this is what they've done, in Australia, this is what they've done, and they think that's global. And then specific becomes now in South Africa and Pretoria. No, that's geography. Specific global is within the subject area. This is the body of knowledge. And in this body of knowledge, what has been established? How do we move from a human to a toe on my feet? And now I can address the nail on that toe. That's what we're talking about. So you need to move from what is known to what is unknown, and then you identify the gap or the limitation within your literature. Then it introduces the concepts and broad issues to be covered in the study. Okay, that's the global aspect. And then clearly identifies knowledge gap arising from a sequence argument on reviewed and cited literature. And then it necessarily puts the research topic, knowledge gap, and selected research problem in a proper context. So you contextualize it. Usually, it should not be any longer than 4 pages. And here we are measuring it from a doctoral level. Otherwise, the background of the study, a very good author and reviewer should be able to make sense within half the paragraph. And you should be able to know, okay, this is where this person is going. This is the argument he's making. But if it takes 2 pages and you are still not clear, where are we going? What is happening here? 3rd page, 4th page, then there's a problem. Okay. So simply put, we have what's known, what is unknown, then you identify limits and the gaps. And that is what we refer to as the critical literature review. You can only do that when you read. Then after you have read, then you raise a burning question. Now, this is not a question in your aim, objective, and research question section. No, this is within the background section where you remember when you identify the gap and the limitation, it will invariably raise a question. So why was this not done? Okay, and a sum total of all these questions you keep raising as you're writing will add up to the issue now that needs to be addressed. And that's what we call the research problem. So in your reading, you will also look at, could it be that their establishing of this knowledge was as a result of the methodology that they had selected, which informed why they were unable to answer this question. So you will also look at the experimental approach or the methods that were used. And then you look at, is what I intend to do, this idea I have that has caused me to read about this and begin to identify this gap, is what I intend to do going to fit into this framework? Or is it a totally new approach? So you now need to explain your experimental view and your experimental approach, whether it is different and how different will it be, and why do you think that this method would actually resolve the problem you are being identified. And this is all in the background information. So simply put, in the background information, you tell a story in a plain English, not text. You know, there are people who think they can only feel very intelligent by speaking difficult English. In science, we don't like that. In fact, the deeper your English becomes, where when you study synonyms of difficult words, the more we think you are trying to hide something. So just write it in a plain English. Take the reader step by step from what is known to what is unknown, then end with a specific question. Emphasize what is new and important about your work, but do not state the answer to the research question, and do not include results or implications. So that's how you tell a story. Of course, I have examples to show how this is done. I took them out because of the time. And then now, once you have laid down this foundation of the background information, it's background. You've now given the foundation of your work. it becomes now clear that this is the actual problem, not hypothetical, but the actual problem that you want to solve. Because sometimes we think we have a problem and we want to solve it, but we keep going around circles because that problem only exists in our mind. So you want to look at, after I've read through and I've provided this background, you want to isolate the research problem and then state exactly what is to be studied. You have given the story. You have taken us through. Now state exactly what you really want to study. Justify the worth of taking the study onto that selected path. And then clearly identifying the research gaps that your study now will fill in and close. It is important that, remember, this is a problem statement, not statements. It's a problem statement. So once you have provided this background information, and then you have now isolated these problems and stating them exactly how they fit into all this equation, we need to see that statement, one sentence, that is so clear and concise that this is actually what the study is all about. And then we will be able to identify how this study will contribute to the body of knowledge. Central in conducting quality research is this identification of a correct and researchable problem. And so you will hear from most of your supervisors and your professors who tell you no problem, no research. That's a simplest statement. And it is true, because how do you convince people that this problem is hypothetical or it is real? It becomes the anchor on which your research now is to be conducted. Always remember that there are many research problems to any one research topic, but it is the way you have structured it and the direction you have taken based on your reading and linking up to the thought that you generated at the beginning. Okay. Now, once you have understood clearly that you now do have a problem, and the problem is real, and it can be sorted out this way, whether it's new knowledge, it's invention, it's a adaptation, it's innovation, whichever way, you now need to tell us what is the output. Okay, and that's what the British call the aim. Okay, you aim at something. So I'm in Pretoria. I'm going to Johannesburg. So my aim is to arrive in Johannesburg. But let me say, let me be more specific, that I want to be in Michael Angel Hotel or Radisson Blu Hotel. So now I'm more direct. I'm leaving Pretoria. I'm going to this hotel in Sandton in Johannesburg. Now, with that aim, it becomes more clearer for me to start off. Even if I'm putting it in the GPS will keep telling me, why are you now going to Mpumalanga? You said you want to be in Sandton. Please, on the next 10 left, and then 10 right again and back into the road. You see that? And that's what the aim does. The aim provides that direction. You become more clearer. It's a purpose or intention on the desired outcome. I am going here, and that's where I'll be at the time I leave this place. I must end up here. And a typical example is the one we have given of a GPS. So if you plug it in and then you decide to take off and you are heading north to Limpopo, the GPS will tell you, turn into this road and turn into the other road and go back, because this is where you are going and not where you are facing. The M is very specific. So if included in the proposal, it must be a concise single sentence. It should have two things in there, and the major part of it is the outcome. So you can't have the aim of a study which reads, again, to analyze the effects of. How can that be an aim? That's a process. Okay, so your aim is the destination. After you have analyzed, and then what? What do you want to achieve? What's the output of this study? Okay, so that's the purpose of the aim, and we want to see that because then it provides direction to your study. Now, the most mandatory part would be the objectives. There are others who deal with the general objectives, which still has a similar mandate like your M, which provides the output or the outcome of the study. And then your objective is now the process that you take to reach your M. So if we take the Pretoria Sandton trip as our research process, my first objective is to get to Midrand or Pretoria or Centurion. That's my first objective. Which then means that if I'm going to take any other route, say I'm going to Bronkhorstspruit route, I will still get to Sandton, but it's a longer route. I will not be able to provide a much more specific, measurable process, because I'm now going long routes to get to the same place, which I could have taken shorter route. Just jump into N1 and boom, I'm in Sandton. So my first objective would be Centurion. I must get to the Centurion. It's measurable. It is specific. I can achieve getting to Centurion. And it's realistic, of course. It's much shorter. It's different from 100 kilometers to Bronkhorstspruit as compared to, is it 10 kilometers to Centurion? See the difference. Then from there now, I can get to Midrand. Again, it's very specific. It is systematic. It's logical. I can't move from Centurion to Sandton and then come back to Midrand. You see, I have to pass through Midrand. It's logical. It's measurable. It's specific. I can get there, and it defines the limits. You see, I know that I must reach Centurion first. So my first objective is to get, once I get to the Centurion, then I can get to the next objective, which is, so the objectives are actually a process leading to your aim. And they must be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. So within 10 minutes, I must reach Centurion. Within 15 minutes, I must reach Midrand. Then there will be another 30 minutes, I should be able to get, and therefore, I can safely say my study will take 3 years because I know how each objectives will be met, how long it will take, and what is involved in getting there. I know I can get to Santon in this hotel because I have measured I will take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and another time because of traffic, I can get there within an hour and a half. I know I can get there. I can measure it. It's within the time, and these objectives are also measurable. And so that is why we say the criteria for testing soundness of objectives are that they must be SMART. They must be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and of course, time-bound. So when you read your objective, check, is it something that will take me to the next stage? And is it something that can be completed and is realistic? Or am I spending much more time on the first one to an extent that the remaining 3 or 4 are literally just centered around this? So can I break these then so that they can create, you know, I've seen people say, first I need to identify, then I need to assess, then I need to determine, and then you ask, okay, if you picked determination, wouldn't identification be implied? Because how will you determine something you haven't identified? So is it possible you can collapse this into this so that now your study becomes more logical, but you have very fewer objectives that are more, you know, professional. They're accurate and the purpose is much more clear? Or is it that you want to continue to break them down? So it depends on what you read. If you read Liddy and Ormerod, I don't know what's the new version now, but in my days, when you read Liddy and Ormerod, it used to say that if you get to more than, if you start getting towards 7, not 7, if you start getting towards the 7 sub-problems, because they are Americans, so they use sub-problems, then you don't know what you are doing. You see why they say that? It's because they know that you are now, you are going around circles. You know, you are from Centurion, then I'll go to Tembisa, then I'll come back to Midrand, then I'll go, and they're asking themselves, but what's in Tembisa? Isn't it your aim is to get to this place? Why don't you just go straight? It's when a person begins to have so many of these, it's an indication of his failure to arrange his mind clearly. Okay, so make sure the objectives are SMART. Research questions usually are a derivative from the research objectives, and so your ability to concisely complete your objectives, then you can easily understand your research questions. Because it's the answer is in the objective. The process you are taking to answer the question is an objective. So the research question must be complete, providing rationale and justification for conducting the study and point to the path to be taken in that research process. Hypothesis, usually from the social science point of view, you understand that the hypothesis would only follow, well, not only, but they would follow a conceptual framework, because that's where the correlation will be seen. And so once you have identified these variables, and then you have the outcome, the dependent variable, or then you can assess whether these variables affect or how they affect directly or indirectly or relate to this dependent variable. So a hypothesis is best described from a conceptual framework. So if it is stated, it is always important that a hypothesis must be testable. So it is a positive statement of a possible outcome. That's a hypothesis. Okay, so they must be tested and must link one or more independent variables to the dependent variables. Then there's literature review that needs to be conducted within the proposal. And in the literature review, the purpose for conducting it is to learn about what other researchers have done before, and particularly related to this topic. Like we said, when you have picked a topic, also identify the body of knowledge where this topic is sitting. Okay, where is this topic sitting? Which is the body of knowledge? Which are the subgroups within this body? That way, it assists you to look for information in a way that you will not struggle in packaging the literature review, in the critiquing. Then you can uncover certain theories and concepts. Now, within the proposal, you will have a section that deals with theoretical framework and the conceptual framework. So when we talk about uncovering the theories, there will be theories that will fit within this framework, the theoretical framework. And then there will be the theories, there will be gaps in the theories that you intend to close. And those gaps are what you make of the theories that have been made by others. So what you make of the theories from others and you develop it, that is your concept. So these address topic of study, knowledge gaps, research problem, objectives and questions. And so only when you review literature can you have a directed approach to your study. It then eliminates or minimizes duplication of past research work done. It also offers justification for the research study to be undertaken, and it can provide the comparison and the contrasting of ideas among already researched work. So your job is to critique what others have done and then distill the ideas for you to use in your study. This literature review in the proposal, remember, is just providing a foundation on which the entire study can now begin to flow later on. So when you are conducting this literature review, endeavor to ensure that it is restricted to your study area and that you are not shooting everywhere. Remember that once you have described your objectives, you have crafted your methodology, your objectives. The methodology itself, I mean, not the methodology, the objective itself provides you key thematic areas that one would want to see in the literature review. Okay, I'll give you an example. I want to conduct a rapid assessment of water infrastructure for residents in a particular township. So my aim, therefore, is first of all to determine what type of infrastructure exists in that township. Okay, now remember my topic is looking at assessment of water infrastructure. But my objective is looking at to establish what type of infrastructure exists. So in my literature review, I will be looking at different types of infrastructure that is used in the water sector. So I'll read about wells, engineered wells. I'll read about shallow wells. I'll read about tap water. I'll read about borehole water. I'll read about distributed water. I'll read about all these other things. So the literature review now is telling me the type of infrastructure I will have in the literature review, the type of information I will have in the literature review. So, but I'm receiving this information from the research objective, and this research objective informs me what I need to consider. So, when I read extensively, I'll be able to establish how do people in Brazil live in their townships? What type of infrastructure do they have? How do people in Santon live? What type of infrastructure do they have? If they have tapped water, is it centralized? Are they mini grids? What type of information do I need? So you notice that literature review extracts direction from your objectives. So your objectives will also inform not just literature review, but also the methodology and how you will carry it out. Then within the sources, or within the literature review, you also need to determine the sources of literature to be reviewed. We always recommend that, like we said earlier, it's information that other experts within that sector have reviewed. So it has to be peer reviewed. So now, if it is information from a newspaper, it might be a headline. This township is drinking dirty water, says the mayor. Then you extract that information because it now gives you a background to your study. You think this is the information I need. And then a week later, the mayor sues the newspaper, and the newspaper apologizes after 3 weeks with a very small statement in the middle of classifieds, you know, where people are dead and are doing smaller selling of things. That's where the apology is. We apologize for misquoting the mayor that the township is drinking dirty water. You won't be able to see that the headline you are relying on has been retracted by the same newspaper. You see, that's the problem of reading unauthoritative newsprints. So we always say it's important that it's peer reviewed, because the peers would check and will tell you, no, this information does not add up. There's somebody who has established this and he found something to the contrary. Could you kindly amend? Some authors would even tell you, read this literature and this literature. So that's the importance of reading published materials. And when we say published materials, we mean there must be reliable information. But there's also unpublished information. Sometimes you do have dissertations and theses. Yes, they've been examined and somebody has written something. It makes a lot of sense, perhaps even published. from it, but it is not yet new knowledge. And this new knowledge has not really been tested globally, okay? But it's good enough to award you qualifications, okay? So you can cite it because it is a good information to use as a baseline for your study, okay? What others have done within the sector from the academic level, so you can use that as a baseline information. Later on, remember that you'll be reviewing and revising this section. When you are done, later on you might find during the course of your literature review chapters, you might find much more tangible, reliable information that you may not even need those unpublished works or manuscripts as something to justify your study. Okay. Other important information you can rely on is obviously, like we said, parliamentary information reports. You know, there are subcommittees or committees in Parliament that listen to users of these information, and sometimes they'll present very factual information. The auditor report, for instance, Parliamentary Accounts Committee can probably provide some of the issues arising from incomplete projects, funding, structures of administration, malpractices, and from there you can glean through, because those are facts that they are presenting after they've audited. You can glean through some materials that can be justifiable to conduct a particular study. So you can use organizational reports and publications, you know, parliamentary informations, and then as a source. Remember, we are talking about literature review in proposal. Then other sources can be internet. Now, the danger with the internet is we have seen people just cut and paste. There's no thinking at all. You still have to decipher the information. And then always important to remember to indicate the website where that information is coming from and when it was accessed. The purpose of indicating those two is that so that in an event that that material has been pulled down, if you check when it was pulled down, you can now justify to say, I relied on this information because it was still on the website at the time. And then it is easier to either remove it as well, or if it has been updated, you can go back to the website and check the updates. Okay, so very important that if you use internet sources, this is captured correctly, the date of access. Examiners sometimes check these things. Board reviewers will check these things, and they should be able to find this document and see that indeed this document existed at the time you say it was. Methodology is also a central component in the research design of the proposal, and it serves, first of all, one, it has to define and set the procedures to be followed in the study, and then describe the nature and processes involved for packaging to be used in the collection and analysis of the data. For instance, how will you process the data? What type of information will you collect and how will it be collected? Will you design a questionnaire? Will you collect materials from the field, take them into the lab, How do you hope to protect that material? Okay. So you have to be very clear. And again, we always advise people, you go back to your objectives, because remember, you have stated how to get to a particular outcome. So show how objective number 1 will be achieved. What will be the philosophical concepts that you will use for objective number 1? What informed that concept? Then what are the methods in there? And which one of these methods will you think is the best suit to address that objective? So again, when it comes to the methodologies, you always have to go back to your objectives, because remember, they've provided a foundation and the direction to which you are going. Okay. And then, of course, the methodology states input and output variables of the study, including definitions and measurements. They also specify and define the methods, tools, techniques to be used in the collection, and then outlines how data will be sampled, including the population where that sample will come from. Okay, maybe within the population, take note that when I'll use the infrastructure section where maybe you are dealing with the contractors. When you say you want to determine how contractors are behaving, maybe in the industry, when you choose the population, your population is in the CIDB, because that's where the registry of contractors is. Then from there, you can now sample what you need. So either you categorize them that I'll deal with the bigger boys, the grade 9, 8, and 7s, or I'll deal with the middle boys, that's the 6, 5, and 4, or I'll deal with the smaller ones, that's the 3, 2, 1. Or if you pick all of them, then all of them become your population. So if you end up with 25,000 companies, that is your population. Now you must sample from that population. Now, there are tools that you use to sample. There are formulas. Yamen, for instance, has been in existence for years, and people are still using them. Using him and his studies, it's a formula, and it will give you the numbers. And there are other formulas as well that can assist you with determination of the population. However, even when you have completed using the scientific means of the population, statistically, there are also other limitations, boundaries. So Yamen might say you need 400. I mean, you need 1 million or 100,000 contractors to be assessed. But your time may not allow to get to 1,000. Your resources may not allow to get to 1,000. So you now need to go into statistics. Statistically, what would be the acceptable sample from the sample that we have selected? Okay, to arrive at a reasonable conclusion that we can justify generalization. Okay, so just make sure that your methods and the boundaries you are set are justified scientifically. No thumb licking, no, I think, because I've been working in that industry or whatever, nothing. Just show through science that this method works, and this is how we ended up with this population. So you need to outline how data is sampled, is collected, the procedure that was followed, the controls that you put in place, and the analysis of that data and how it was done. Provide that information. Within the proposal, you need to submit a timetable or timelines. In fact, like we had said earlier, what constitutes a timetable anyway? I mean, a proposal. It's a time and a budget. So you need to provide information on the estimated time to complete the study. Now, this is not just because the university says our PhDs take 3 years. So you start with the 3 years, then you begin working backward. Let's say I'll take 3 months to write. Okay, let's say I'll take a methodology, and then it's now 3 years. That's cheating. And usually you fail to complete because you did not apply your mind. Application of the mind, again, comes from your SMART objectives. Remember, they are time bound, they are specific, you can measure them. So your time for each objective adds up. So if your time for each objective adding up takes you to 4 years, don't go and tell people, no, I'll finish it within 3 years. You finish it within 4 years. But when you start working, they will advise you, you need to accelerate here and here and here so that we can save our time to fit within our 3-year period. But 4 years is not bad enough. Okay? It's reasonable. It's within 3 to 5 years, so maybe it's fine. But your actual conducting of the study will now reveal to you that there are certain parameters that you can crash in the process, because even in the project management, we do that. We have a program that we provide, then we crash the program so that certain factors or certain activities can run parallel, and then we now save on time. They're not sequential, but they can run parallel, but they still become sequential, not necessarily as individual activities, but they become sequential when they tap into an activity where they all depend on for precedence. Okay, so that's how you manage your time, and from there you can now come up with a reasonable schedule of activities. Usually, we prefer using Gantt chart because it's easier to see than simply saying it 2 months, 3 months. There are others who want to complicate matters and go through networks. It's okay, but take note that not everyone understands the networks. The critical path analysis, your PERT, your PET rather, and your critical chain. Not everybody understands that. So you have to provide them something they can relate to, so that when they're giving you advice, they can tell you that, look, this and this can actually be shrunk together, and this we can save our time here, or this we can do it in parallel like this. Okay, and they'll be able to tell you that, look, the sequence here is not working. How is it that you will be discussing, but actually you have not yet conducted the research? So the sequence itself will also be reviewed in the timetable. Then, of course, the budget comes from the timetable. You don't budget first. Your budget comes from because each activity has time. So if you say it will take me so much, what is the resource? Therefore, I can work around this. Okay. Prof, you have a question? Okay, so references, check the university, what they recommend. Are they following the Harvard, there's the APA or IEEE style? It has become generally acceptable that in social sciences, sorry, not a medical, life sciences as they call them, life sciences, the vet, the medicine, electronics and the electrical guys, they use IEEE. But generally speaking, most universities we have looked at prefer Harvard referencing. So familiarize yourself with Harvard referencing. You will find that the Modern Language Association and the APA and Harvard, they are very close to each other. And if you're not very careful, you might start interchanging them and thinking you're using the same style. There are examiners I've seen that are very critical about which style to use, and you can irritate them if you keep interchanging them. So be systematic and be consistent. There are tips on writing a winning research proposal. So this you can read on your own. First of all, you need to pick the correct problem and then conduct a deep literature review. Then outline your methodology and methods clearly, and then detail a work plan. A work plan will always provide you a good budget. And then credible references. Credible references should not be more than 5 to 10 years old at the time of submission. Okay. Then, of course, there are certain violations you want to avoid, like sticking to the research proposal length and style specified in the core, and keeping within the stipulated budget lines to avoid over budget or even later on asking for more money because you were under budgeting. Good quality, qualities of a good research proposal depend on how well you communicate. So your writing skills are essential, okay? The detail and most economic way about the problem has to be very, very clear so that your supervisor understands that you are able to communicate and that you are able to conduct that study. And then you must be formal, precise, and economical. Ideally, a proposal shouldn't exceed 10 to 15 pages, but ensure that you also have reasonable, great quality, credible references. All right, so I'll stop here for now and maybe take more questions.